Hi friends, hope you are doing well. I'm Dr. Ganguly. Welcome to my channel. So today I'm going to answer a viewer's question, and this question is, how do you set up a research lab? Now this is a problem which confronts many young faculty, assistant professors, lecturers out there. When they get a faculty position, one of the first things they have to contemplate is how they are going to set up the research lab. So I'm going to discuss this issue and give you some ideas here. Now, the number one point is you have to look at your research statement. Now, most of the time when you apply for a faculty position, you need to submit a document known as the research statement. In this document, you mention the different problems which you are going to do over the next few years. Now, typically people plan for the next 3 to 5 years, and one of the suggestions in the research statement is to find some problem which continues with your PhD problem, and if you have done a postdoc, then you find a problem which continues with your postdoc problem. Now, one of the things is that whenever you write a PhD, give importance to some of the future work which can come out of the PhD, and maybe write this at the end of the conclusion of your thesis. This will always help you later. Now, once you have figured out a couple of problems here, maybe you can pick up a third problem. This is something which is hot or current in your field. And these three problems essentially will form the bedrock of your research statement. Now, once you have written the research statement, this becomes a template by which you can essentially ask for money for the research grants and so on. So then we come to point number two, which is funding strategies. And of course, one of the first things you will ask the university if you get a job is some kind of startup grant. And startup grant is very important because most universities give startup grant to new faculty. This is the first and probably the last time the university is going to give you something. So you need to be very careful about asking the appropriate amount of money here. Now, one of the things in the startup grant is that you have to think a lot. You have to tie the startup grant with your research statement, with the research problems you have proposed. And the trick here is not to ask for too much and not to ask for too less. Now, one of the problems is that if you ask for too less, then sometimes people think that you have nothing worthwhile to give. So there is a general saying out there is that if you do not ask for much, then maybe you have nothing much to give. Now, the second problem happens if you ask for too much. And if you ask for too much, then what happens is that people can sometimes think that you are not familiar with the real world out there and you may be a spoiled brat. So again, this can become negative for you. So one of the things you should do during your research visit itself at the university is that you should take a look around. You should gauge the type of expenses, the type of equipment which is out there in the place, and make an estimate or make a demand as far as the startup fund is concerned based on what you see around the place which you are in. So the amount of money you ask should be in sync with the particular university concerned. Now, sometimes the department chair, some professors, some assistant professors may help you in figuring out some of these things, and sometimes it is possible that you join the university and then you ask for the startup grant. But in many situations, you actually have to ask for the startup grant right at the beginning, and this may be difficult because you may not have a good estimate at this point. So the next thing, of course, is to use the startup grant to get more money. And one of the reasons the university gives you startup grants is that they expect that you will buy some equipment, buy some computers, set up your lab, and then this lab will become like a business which is going to get more money for the university. So this money typically comes from different government funds. Sometimes it can come from corporate, sometimes from non-profits and so on. But generally in most research areas, the majority of the funding comes from the government. So this is something you need to keep in mind. You need to look at the different bodies out there which provide funding for your type of research. And you should think that how you can write proposals to these bodies, because most of the time these bodies may give you some money to buy some equipment and so on, but mostly they will be funding for project student, they may be funding for students, they may be funding for staff, they may be funding consumables and so on. So very often different funding bodies out there do not like to give lot of grants for equipment and so on. Now the third problem has to do with setting up of the lab itself, and hopefully you have got the money and now you need to figure out what equipment to buy, what computers to buy. And again, need to look at the different vendors who are out there in the university, how you can put in the different orders with these vendors. So sometime you may need to buy computers, sometime microscopes, sometime consumables, experimental setups, for example, in chemistry, in physics, in bio. And once you have accumulated all these things, you need to set up your lab here. Now that brings us to point number 4, which has to do with the amount of space you are going to require. Now, of course, space is the final frontier in general. As far as academia is concerned, space is something which is very much coveted by the different professors. And so when you join a university, they try to give you as less space as possible. And it's important to keep in mind again that if you ask for too much space, it may not be appropriate. If you ask for too less space, then you will be stuck with that for the rest of your life. So make it a point to have at least enough space to seat 3 to 5 students or project staff, and make it a point that you get this space. So this is something which is very important in many different universities. Now, what are you going to do with this space? You need this space to seat the different students. So you are going to require desks. You are going to require space for putting up the different type of equipments you have, the computers, the bookshelves, and so on. And so you need to actually have a picture of your lab out there. Sometimes it is a good idea to make this picture in something like PowerPoint and keep it with yourself, and you can even use it to make presentations to the faculty or the dean or the chairman as to what your lab is going to look like. So the better plan you have, the more it is going to actually fructify into the real experience. Now the 5th point has to do with the different things you need as far as the lab is concerned. So we could put it under some title like infrastructure. So this could require plumbing, it could be the power connections you require, the special issues related to safety, and so on. So there are different type of labs out there. Some of the labs may require specialized type of power. Some of the labs may have specialized safety issues. For example, the disposal of biological specimens, and all these things need to be factored in here. Now you may need to confirm with various government guidelines which are out there, for example for the treatment of different type of creatures, different type of subjects, and all these need to be factored in here. You may also need to pay special importance to safety and regulations related to the laws of your specific country. Now the 6th issue has to do with sharing, and it's of course very much possible that you are able to share some facilities with some other professors out there. Now be advised that many professors are very reluctant to share any of their facilities unless you want to become a joint collaborator with them, maybe write research proposals with them, and so on. So again, you can have a plan like that. You can have a plan and write a proposal with some well-funded professor in the department, and then you can use their facility. But do remember that this is going to be at a certain price, because many people later are going to say that you have been working with this senior professor and so you may not have shown sufficient level of self-motivation out there. So this is something you need to keep in mind. Now there are certain centers out there in terms of multidisciplinary centers and such funded bodies by the government, and you can sometimes take advantage of these centers because some of the facilities which they have are there for all the people in the campus. So I hope this particular video gives you some outline about how to set up a research lab. Like I mentioned before, this is a rather complex process. So if you have any kind of person inside the university who can help you, typically the best person here is a newly joined faculty, then that's going to be very useful for you. So when you are at the university, when you are meeting with the different professors concerned, make it a point to know the names and the contacts of some of the young faculty out there so that you can later dash off an email to them, maybe call them on FaceTime if they let you do that, or on WhatsApp, and then ask them for certain guidelines about what is the expected or what is the suggested amount of money you can ask to the university, what is the amount of space which is considered appropriate, and so on, because this kind of knowledge can be very beneficial to you.